It seems that no matter how hard you try to bury the past, no matter how hard you try to keep evil in its place, sooner or later, it's going to come back to haunt you. So in episode 3 of The Real Man, we say hello to an old friend. Or, more appropriately, an old enemy.
When John Carpenter's Halloween hit theaters in 1978, it not only made $70 million worldwide and gave some budding Hollywood careers a welcome leg up, it also introduced the world to a new breed of movie monster. It was the first appearance of the unstoppable boogeyman, Michael Myers. Unlike the psychotic yet tragic villain Norman Bates from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Myers was simply evil in a human form. In 1981, the film's first sequel, Halloween 2, continued the horror as Michael slashed, stabbed, strangled, drowned, and smashed his way through many more unfortunate victims before meeting, quite literally, an explosive demise. With Michael definitively dead, the creative team of Carpenter, Hill, Cundy, and Wallace decided to move the series in another direction, to seek new worlds to conquer. The result of their labors was the great and original Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Unfortunately, the film was a commercial failure. Even worse than that, the hardcore fans of the first two films not only hated it, they felt betrayed. After this utter disappointment, the creative team decided that maybe it was time to distance themselves from their brainchild. And like so many good rock bands of old, they decided to go their separate ways and leave Halloween in the rearview mirror. It was the end of an era. Now, thanks to Dino De Laurentiis' involvement in the sequel, the franchise languished on the back shelves of Universal Studios for 6 long years before finally making their way back to the point of origin, Compass International Pictures. Not unlike how Michael Myers himself waited 15 years in the Smiths Grove Sanitarium before finally coming home to Haddonfield. But there was no immediate rallying cry to restart the mayhem. With most of the old team gone, the battle for the future of Halloween was over. But there was one man who absolutely refused to lay down arms even when all hope seemed to be lost. And that man was producer Mustafa Akkad. Akkad was a successful producer and director who had created the 2 films Muhammad the Prophet and Lion of the Desert, both starring Anthony Quinn. He was also the fellow that bankrolled the $300,000 budget that was necessary to create the original Halloween. He was executive producer on all 3 films, and he became sole owner of the franchise after everyone else had dumped their stake in it. Adamant that he could get the franchise back on track again, Akkad decided to start over and brought in a brand new production team. His main point of attack, like a general leading troops into battle, was to address the criticisms of Halloween 3 and correct them. More specifically, the complaint about the lack of the iconic bad guy that they had all come to know and love. They wanted him back, and so Akkad decided to give them exactly what they wanted. So it was in 1988, 10 years after his introduction to the world, he comes home in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. 10 years after being caught in a fiery explosion and presumed dead, a comatose Michael Myers is being transferred from the Ridgepoint Federal Sanitarium back to Smiths Grove. In transit, he overhears the ambulance crew mentioning that Laurie Strode, his intended victim/sister, has recently died, leaving behind a young daughter named Jamie. This information causes Michael to wake up, kill the ambulance crew, and escape. When news of Michael's awakening breaks, Dr. Loomis, who also survived the explosion, immediately heads for Haddonfield to warn the town. Jamie, now orphaned, is living with the Carruthers family and their daughter Rachel. Despite their attempts to shower her with love and support, Jamie struggles with the loss of her mother and being tormented by nightmares of her homicidal uncle, whom she has never met before. Halloween night comes to Haddonfield and Michael arrives with it. He disables the telephone lines and causes a citywide blackout, effectively cutting off Haddonfield from the rest of the world. With no outside help coming, Loomis, Jamie, Rachel, the sheriff, and an armed posse must rally together in order to put a definite end to Michael's reign of terror, paving the way for one of the most intense and shocking endings in the series.
When embarking upon your first viewing of Halloween 4, it's important to remember that this is definitely not the work of those who created the franchise. See, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill were attached to the project in the beginning phases of pre-production. See, Hill was going to produce the film and John Carpenter was going to co-write it with another screenwriter. Now, I don't know fully what the details of it were, but I do know that the finished script apparently had something to do with Halloween being banned in Haddonfield, and that apparently the parents of the town were still frightened and horrified of the events of the first two films, that apparently their fear and paranoia is what brings Michael back into corporeal existence. It's a little strange, but it sounds kind of interesting. However, Akkad rejected that script completely, calling it too cerebral of an idea. So, Carpenter and Hill sold their shares of the franchise and walked away.
Wanting pure simplicity, Akkad brought in Alan B. McElroy to pen the screenplay. The director's chair was filled by Dwight H. Little, and a fellow by the name of Peter Lyons Collister was brought on as director of photography. Composer Alan Howarth, a longtime collaborator of Carpenter's and co-composer for Halloween 2 and 3, was approached to recreate the classic Halloween theme music as well as the new score. With Carpenter's blessing, Howarth accepted the job, making him and Akkad the only two returning members of the first three productions.
The collaboration between Little and Collister results in a nicely composed film. The prime example being the opening title sequence, where the backdrop is isolated farm country that's all adorned with Halloween decorations and accompanied by a creepy atmospheric score by Howarth. And then the scenery is suddenly overpowered by a dark and ominous aura that's applied by the arrival of these very nasty looking thunderclouds that herald the arrival of an approaching thunderstorm. Almost subconsciously, we are alerted that this quiet serenity is about to be rocked by a storm of a much bloodier variety. And I'm not the first person to use this opening title sequence as an example. I believe James Rolfe on Cinemassacre.com, when he did his review of Halloween 4, referred to it. But he makes a valid point that I happen to share, and I think it's worth going over again. This new atmosphere is definitely worlds away from the original Halloween, but it's effective nonetheless. The story is surprisingly well written and compelling. At its core, it's still very much a cat and mouse thriller, but it's loaded with subplots. I mean, there's the obvious story of Michael trying to kill Jamie and Dr. Loomis is trying to stop him, but there's way more to it than that. See, first off is the knowledge that Jamie and Michael are blood relatives. Almost everyone in the town of Haddonfield is aware of that knowledge, but for the most part, they willingly overlook it for her sake. Although there's the odd sociopathic bully at her school that torments her about it every now and again. And then when Michael attacks later on in the film, those very same people that overlook that knowledge willingly come to her aid and make the ultimate sacrifice so that she could live. This makes me think back to a scene in Halloween 2 where the townsfolk trash Michael's childhood home in response to all the carnage that he's unleashing.
Hunt, send another vehicle. The old miner's house, 45 Lempton Lane.
The tribe. One of their number was butchered. This is the wake.
Then there's a subplot that I would have loved to have seen more of. See, it's a few minutes into the movie. Michael has annihilated the entire sheriff's department and the power and phone lines are cut. There is no help coming to save them. But then, some unlikely heroes emerge in the form of a group of drunken hunters led by Earl, the owner of the local watering hole. See, at first you think these guys are a bunch of yahoos out for a good time, but it's actually a bit more complicated than that. See, one of the hunters, a guy by the name of Big Al, happens to be the father of one of Michael's victims from his rampage 10 years ago. So it gives these guys plenty of motive to be out for his blood. And I think it's an interesting addition because it makes the town of Haddonfield into a character. See, this isn't about them trying to protect Jamie from Michael. That's a bonus. See, this is about them trying to close the book on this one dark chapter of their history. However, as good as this story is, there are some major plot holes that, in my opinion, are not sufficiently plugged by the end of the movie. Firstly, how did Dr. Loomis survive the hospital explosion at the end of Halloween 2 with far less severe injuries than Michael did? I mean, granted, it's not that important of a question, but it still makes me scratch my head because he was at the epicenter of that explosion. Realistically, he should have been looking more like Sam Raimi's main character in the movie Darkman. Then there's the matter of how Michael was so easily able to locate Jamie as soon as he hit town. I mean, the only information he had was what he overheard from the ambulance crew transporting him, and their knowledge seems to be limited to her first name. Maybe they had a file full of information about her conveniently tucked under the passenger seat for him? Plus then there's the scene in the costume shop when Jamie picks out a clown costume, which is creepily similar to the one that Michael wore the night he murdered his sister. And as she's checking herself out in the mirror, she for a brief moment sees young Michael's reflection in the mirror instead of her own. Then there's a matter of Michael's new physical capabilities. Not only is he able to recover from muscle atrophy freakishly fast, he's now strong enough to force his finger through someone's skull and impale someone with a shotgun. Where did he get superhuman strength all of a sudden? Was he bombarded with gamma rays in between sponge baths and changing his bandages?
In terms of acting, the supporting characters are all performed well, but the bulk of them are little more than ducks in the shooting gallery for Michael to knock down. However, there are 4 standouts that need to be mentioned. First, there's Donald Pleasance, back as an older and wiser Dr. Loomis.
Pleasance delivers an amazing performance as always, becoming the franchise's old faithful. Now, rather than just repeat the same shtick that he had come up with in the previous 2 films, he decided to take Loomis to the very next level. You see, instead of him being all shocked and horrified that Michael is awoken, he's actually ready for it. See, he knew that Michael was going to wake up eventually, he just didn't know when exactly. And Pleasance plays it almost like this battle-hardened war veteran. He's really tired of fighting and he wants to stop. But he doesn't dare because there are still people in danger. So he soldiers on for the sake of everyone else. Thank God that Pleasance came back for this movie because I shudder to think what it could have turned out like without him. His very presence in the film reminds us that this one, no matter how different in tone, is still Halloween.
Since Jamie Lee Curtis declined to return to the role of Laurie Strode, and rather than recast her, McElroy decided to kill her off and replace her with a new heroine. This new character is Jamie Lloyd, daughter of Laurie Strode, and she is played by child actress Danielle Harris.
Only 9 or 10 years old at the time, Harris was already remarkably talented. She appeared on several television shows and soap operas before this film, but Halloween 4 was the film that started her movie career. From the first moment she appears on screen, we fall in love with this little girl. Every time she cries, we feel sad. Every time she smiles, our heart warms. Every time she's put into danger, we are put on the edge of our seats and we feel great catharsis for when she finally gets out of trouble. Now, I almost feel like maybe the audience is more inclined to care about Jamie a bit more than her mother, Lori, because Jamie's only a little girl and she's very limited in terms of fighting back. Then there's the enormous sympathy we feel for her due to the fact that Michael is her uncle. It makes me think of the stigma that the relatives of real-life serial killers must go through on a day-to-day basis, and it's really sad. I mean, trying to imagine what your life would be like if Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac Killer, or Ed Gein was your father, your brother, or your cousin. And then try to walk down the same street as everybody else who know that fact. Harris's performance reminds me a little bit of Linda Blair's performance as Reagan in William Friedkin's The Exorcist. One second she's the epitome of innocence, and then the shit hits the fan. See, in the finale, after Michael's been blasted to hell, knocked down an abandoned mineshaft, and presumed dead, yet again, Jamie and Rachel are safely at home. Jamie's like foster mother takes her upstairs to put her to bed, I believe, and then Jamie proceeds to attack her foster mother with a pair of scissors, very much mimicking the circumstances of Michael murdering his sister Judith all those years ago. It's really disturbing, terrifying, and heartbreaking to watch. In the final moments of the film, we're left with our innocent heroine becoming the villain.
Another welcome addition is Ellie Cornell as Rachel, Jamie's foster sibling. Cornell plays Rachel as an ordinary teenage girl, and her performance feels incredibly natural.
Rachel has pretty much the same kind of quirks that any teenage girl has. She worries about her weight, she enjoys hanging out at the mall with her girlfriends, and she pines for the object of her affection, a boy named Brady. There is one moment in the film that casts a bit of a dark smudge against her character. See, it's a scene where her mother finds out that the babysitter they had lined up to watch Jamie on Halloween night has canceled on them, meaning Rachel is the only possible candidate who can do it. Rachel then turns into a complete and total drama queen, saying she couldn't possibly do it because she's got a big date with Brady that night. And in the middle of her tirade, she ends up saying something quite hurtful about Jamie, while Jamie's standing right behind her, that is. Now, we don't hold it against her because we know that deep down she really does love Jamie like a flesh and blood sister. The chemistry between Harris and Cornell is what makes him so damn lovable, and it's very genuine. I guess in an odd way, it's okay that Laurie Strode's not in the movie because with Jamie and Rachel, we get the same character traits that we would have gotten with Laurie anyway. See, on one hand, you got Jamie that's sort of the scared victim role that brings feelings of great tension within the audience. On the other hand, Rachel is the badass ass kicker that comes at Michael with everything she's got. Sorry, Mr. Cameraman.
The fourth and final standout is New York actor Beau Starr. Most people will likely recognize him from the Martin Scorsese gangster epic Goodfellas, where he played the father of Ray Liotta's character Henry Hill. In Halloween 4, Starr portrays Ben Meeker, the current sheriff of Haddonfield, after Sheriff Brackett retired and moved away a few years ago.
Meeker is one tough mofo with a big heart. However, he very narrowly follows the same path of ignorance when Dr. Loomis comes back to town. See, he momentarily has that same attitude of denial that Sheriff Brackett had in the original film, but then, after reminding himself of what happened 10 years earlier, he sets out with Dr. Loomis to make damn sure history doesn't repeat itself. Now, Starr has this very intimidating presence that's indicative of a Hollywood gangster, but at the same time he has the softness that's indicative of a big teddy bear. Another actor that possessed that quality was the late James Gandolfini. Now, overall, I think Meeker is a very likable character, which makes me feel horribly sorry for the guy when he suffers the same tragic loss of his daughter that Sheriff Brackett did. Even though Meeker's daughter was a big-boobed blonde bimbo who was screwing Brady behind Rachel's back. Was that just a soap opera moment I just had?
Now for the most important and sadly the most disappointing element of Halloween 4, Michael Myers. This go around, Michael is played by stuntman George P. Wilbur, and I'm sorry to say that I was neither scared nor impressed.
In the beginning, this incarnation of Michael is very reminiscent of Dick Warlock's portrayal in Halloween 2. Different but promising. However, that promise disappears the second he puts on the trademark mask and coveralls. Kind of like how the 1995 film adaptation of Judge Dredd starring Sylvester Stallone started out great and then immediately turned to crap as soon as Dredd took his helmet off. But that's a story for a whole other episode. Wilbur's body language is so stiff and robotic, as if the only direction he was given was, "Psh, hey, why don't you go stand over there and look scary?" Now, it's not my intention to insult Wilbur because he's a really good stuntman, and his work in that field in the movie is one of the best parts of it, particularly in the final battle he has against Earl's entire posse in the bed of Earl's pickup truck that's going down the road at highway speed. But why, for the love of all that's holy, didn't they let him watch the first two movies so he could study what had been done before so he could do something better than the final result? Recently on YouTube, I saw an interview with director Dwight H. and his comment on when they cast George Wilbur as Michael, he said they were looking for sort of a lumbering walk in terms of how Michael moves. In that case, I can forgive Wilbur for any kind of mistakes on his part because he should have been given better directions and he should have been given more flexibility to play around with the role. Then there's the matter of Michael's iconic white mask. In the original film, the mask started life as a William Shatner / Captain Kirk mask from Star Trek. Tommy Lee Wallace got a hold of it, he made the eye holes more round, he removed the eyebrows, he painted the whole thing white, and then tussed up the hair a little to make it more wild and unkempt. The result was something that had the rough physical features and outlines of a human face, but with no visible emotion anywhere in it. And even though the mask is mostly featureless, it has that unique property where it looks like it can change expression just depending on how you light the thing. It may have been a very simple and cheap solution to a costuming problem, but it created a horror icon. In Halloween 4, there are some serious quality issues with the mask. First, you've got the addition of some very brown yet noticeable eyebrows on it. The hair is very clean, very straight, and close to the skull, and the whole featureless effect of it is ruined by the addition of a very subtle yet pleasant smile sculpted into it. This mask looks like a cheap piece of dime store shit. A cheap child's costume, mass-produced on a machine, stuffed into a bag, and had a price tag slapped right on top of it. And don't tell me it was lack of money. This movie had a budget of $5 million. That's a little over 16 times the budget of the original film, and this was the best they can come up with. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking it's a trivial thing to get caught up like a mask, but when it's an important part of the ensemble of one of the most iconic villains in horror fiction, details are everything. I mean, just imagine what life would be like if Jason's hockey mask didn't exist, or if Freddy Krueger didn't have his famous knife glove, or if Leatherface didn't have a chainsaw. In all fairness, and in my personal opinion, I feel that the production of Halloween 4 was nothing more than an elaborate customer service strategy to please everyone that hated Halloween 3. But there's no denying it that everyone that was involved in the production of this one loved the original film and were determined to do it justice. And I think they did just that. In a nutshell, Halloween 4 is not in the same ballpark as the first two. The classiness is gone, the tone is very different, and in my opinion, this version of Michael Myers is subpar at best. But with all that being said, it's got a very well written story, the directing is solid, the cinematography is good, and the acting's decent. Donald Pleasance's return is very welcome, and that ending with Jamie was an incredible shock that opens the door to a new world of possibility for the franchise going forward. Against all odds, it brought an alienated fan base back into the fold and made a little bit of money too. In conclusion, Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers doesn't recapture the magic of the original, but it's still enjoyable because it doesn't pretend to be anything more than what it is. In keeping with that rock band analogy I used earlier, I look at this as being a heartfelt tribute album performed by a decent cover band. Halloween 4 only had one objective, and that was to bring back the boogeyman we all love to be scared of. And while the execution wasn't perfect, I'm happy to report, mission accomplished. Well, that's all, folks. That's the conclusion of this year's Halloween franchise review. Now, some of you are probably thinking, wait a second, you only tackled 4 films, and there's at least 6 more. Well, I am aware of that, but with a lack of free time and a 12-hour-a-day job, it's hard to find the time to make 9 episodes that tackle the whole franchise. But no need to worry, I will tackle the rest of the franchise in due course. But I don't want to burn you guys out on Halloween, and I don't want to burn myself out on Halloween, and there's plenty of other films I want to review, and plus Michael Myers ain't going nowhere anytime soon. So, from the bottom of my heart, well, like I was saying, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for watching, and have a happy Halloween.